Hi, I'm Jane Leader, the host of Older Women and Friends. I've been at this for about 3 years, and people always ask me, how did you, as a 77-year-old, get into podcasting? It was really kind of a crazy decision. I was talking with a friend on my 77th birthday, and she asked me what I hoped to accomplish or what I wanted to see in the new year. And initially, I just came up with all the things I didn't want to do. I didn't want to write another book. I didn't want to continue as a feature writer for magazines and newspapers. I was at a loss, and then suddenly, and I have no idea where this idea came from, I said, I want to be a podcaster. And mind you, I had probably listened to maybe 5 podcasts partially in my life prior to that. So that was a very strange response. But my friends started screaming and said, oh my God, that's what I was going to suggest. And that's all I needed was a little bit of a push and support. And I just dove in head first. I learned everything I could about podcasting. And then I went through, the trials and tribulations of doing all the technical work. In fact, I had someone who was a professional come to my house to teach me how to edit online. And we sat there for hours, and honestly, I had the worst migraine headache that I've ever had in my life, and I made the decision right then and there that I was going to pay someone to do the editing. Now, I know there are a lot of podcasters, including some of my acquaintances, who do all the editing themselves. Hats off to you, but I'm not there. I'm not going to do that. So, as I mentioned, I was 77, and I was really curious about what other women were experiencing, what decisions they were making. Were they retiring? And if not, were they moving into new careers like I was? I had so many questions. How were their bodies? Were they still upright? Were they still able to do everything that they used to do? What about some of the women who were coaching? Coaching, honestly, I never knew there was such a thing. But as I got going on this, I learned that there are a wealth of older women and younger women out there, hopefully who've been certified, and they are working on everything with their female clients from A to Z. So I had looking at coaches. What about authors? What about older women who were writing either fiction or nonfiction? What did they have to say? What about the new living arrangements where I think they call it solo aging, where women, for whatever reasons, are living by themselves as older women? They may have a partner, but that partner does not live under the same roof. There are lots of advantages, these women tell me. I'm not totally convinced, but from time to time, I think it's a really fabulous idea. And, there were some other, everything. I've just covered the waterfront, from health issues to social issues to the idea that, in fact, older women like myself are invisible, that nobody really cares about us, that nobody listens to our ideas and what we have to say. And, of course, I found that was absolutely false. So at age 77, at the end of the year, I started Older Women and Friends, and it has been a joy and a lifesaver because, as I mentioned, I had no idea what I was going to do next. Now I wake up every morning and I'm excited. I have something creative to do. I get to interview fascinating older women who are doing extraordinary things. I am very blessed to have this new profession, occupation at this age. And speaking of age, I turned 80. Now, if you're listening to this, I don't know, in 2027, 2028, I'm already 81 or 82, but I did turn 80 last year, and people want to know what it's like. What's it like to be 80? And I say, I can only respond to that question based on my own experience. And my experience is, yes, there are some physical issues that are running wild, but in the main, if we stay on top of things, we are vital, we are interesting, we are funny, and we are anything but walking around in shadows. So bah humbug on that stereotype. I am active. I did Pilates. I've stopped right now. I walked out of one class and said out loud, I really hate Pilates, but I'm a dancer or a professional dance student, and I dance in a contemporary class for older women as often as I can. I do yoga at least once a week. I keep my mind sharp by learning to speak Spanish now. I have to say that I'm not learning as quickly as I did when I was studying French in junior high school and senior high school, but I'm doing okay. And when we go to Mexico, which is every year, I have a chance to communicate in Spanish, and lo and behold, people understand what I am saying or what I'm asking, and in the reverse, I generally understand them. So keeping my mind active, not only with podcasts, not only researching potential guests, no longer writing bios, studying another language, I'm doing okay. Now, mind you, I make the same mistakes every year. I have my workbooks from a Spanish class that I took in Mexico several years ago, and I do the exercises, and then I go back, and it's like, damn, I can't believe it. I don't know how to conjugate that verb. I don't know what the verb is in the first place. But that's okay. And I think that's something that older women, older men, we all need to think about. And that is, it's okay to make mistakes. We all make mistakes. We should not put pressure on ourselves. We should have a sense of humor. We should laugh at ourselves. We should just relax a little bit. This is not school. We're not trying to please our parents or our teachers. We are just out for ourselves. So I think humor is one of the key components of aging, as happy older women have to laugh at ourselves. Okay, so the typical example is I'm standing in front of the refrigerator and I have no friggin' idea why I'm there in the first place. Or standing in my kitchen and absolutely forgetting my phone number. I could not get it. I mean, it's insane. And I just burst out laughing. What the heck else can we do? We can walk around and say, oh man, I may have dementia or the precursor to dementia. Chances are we do not. There are many fewer Americans who have dementia, Alzheimer's, than the stereotypes would have it. So we just have to realize, as older people, we have so much experience. We've done so many things. We've talked, we've met, we've studied, we've watched so many different people that sometimes it just takes us a while. We need to shuffle through all of what's in our brain, and that is extensive. And 9 out of 10 times we get the answer. It may be 5 minutes later. Oh, I don't know. It may be 2 days later, but the information is there. And unlike younger people who have had fewer experiences, we can see the pros and the cons. We can see the gray area. So our decision making is more complicated, more expansive. So instead of looking at a situation and coming up with a response automatically, we have to funnel through all that gray area. And then more than likely, we come up with the right answer or an answer that's funny, or I don't know, an answer that we think about, or we just have to throw up our hands and ask Alexa, Alexa, do you know? And fill in the blank. Okay, so that's kind of me as an 80-year-old. I wanted to backtrack because I mentioned I didn't want to write any books, didn't want to write any more feature articles for newspapers and magazines. I have 3, I call them big books under my belt. I wrote a book called Dead Serious, which is a book about teen suicide. And why did I write that book? I wrote that book because my brother took his own life. He was 30, not a teenager, but because I had taught high school English, I figured I had a beat on younger people. And as I did my research, it was very clear that at that time, at the end of the 80s, is that right? I'll have to look it up. There was very little out there for younger people. There were plenty of books about adults, but not for younger teens and even younger than that. So writing that book was the beginning of my journey to come to grips with my grief, to begin to understand perhaps what may have let my brother go to such an extreme. I needed to hear the stories of others. I needed to hear the stories of other siblings. I wanted to talk to parents of kids who had either taken their lives or had attempted or were thinking about it. And I needed to understand what I could do, what anybody can do to help someone who is severely depressed and who is or might be thinking about suicide. So Dead Serious, a book for teenagers about teen suicide, was my first big book. Following that, I wrote a book called The Sibling Connection, How Siblings Affect Our Lives. Why? Because even though I thought I had put the whole experience with my brother's death away and I wasn't going to have to deal with it on a regular basis, I realized that I wasn't there yet. And because this was my brother, I was the oldest of 4. He was my best friend in the family. It seemed only reasonable that I would write about siblings, the connection, how we grow up, what our differences are, the contrast between nature and nurture, how we can offer an olive branch if in fact we are estranged from a sibling. That was such a wonderful book to research. I got to travel around the country to talk about my book, to lead some workshops, and I'm very proud of that. And every once in a while, I take it out. On the other hand, I bumped into one of my former students who's now in her 60s, and she was talking about the relationship with a brother. And I just said, look, I wrote a book, but to tell you the truth, I'm having an issue with my own brother from whom I am estranged. So, take what I've written with a grain of salt because it's not that easy to mend sibling relationships. And my third and final book to this point was called Thanks for the Memories, love, sex, and World War II. Not about siblings, not about suicide, but about relationships. I was sitting around a Thanksgiving table with my mother and a cousin of hers by marriage, and they started to swap stories about what life was like for them during World War II. My mother, for example, followed my father from one training camp to the other until he got his orders to go overseas. She would try to make a space as comfy and inviting as possible. The reality is that my father, like many, many thousands and thousands of other men, had to live on the base, and they had visiting hours as if they were in a hospital, and this limited amount of time when they could see each other. So keeping those marriages or partnerships together was a challenge in and of itself. As it turned out, during this time, before my father, as a pilot, was sent overseas to Italy, my mother was pregnant with me. So she had to deal with all the physical changes while they were, as they say, schlepping around the country. And she was more than likely going to give birth when my father was still in Italy. The story of my birth is really exciting. I tell it in the book, and I'll give it to you very quickly now. As I mentioned, my father was in Italy. My mother went into labor. My father was involved in a little contest, if you will. One of the majors or bigwigs needed to be flown back to the United States. And so everybody put their name in a hat, and my father's name was drawn. So he was able, knowing that it was time for my mother to give birth, to come back. My parents were living at the time in Detroit. My mother was now living with her mother, my grandmother. And my dad arrived and said, "Where is Shirley?" And my grandmother said, "She's in the hospital." My father got into, I don't know if he leased a car. I don't even know if they had rental cars. Maybe he took my grandparents' car. But he zoomed off, and about 5 minutes later, he came back and said, "What hospital?" So he got to Providence Hospital, which was at the time a Catholic hospital, and he wanted to see my mother. He was told that she was in labor, that everything was fine, that he ought to take a seat, and after the child was born, he would be able to go and see my mother. Well, my father would have absolutely none of that, and he pleaded his case, and he said, "Look, I'm coming back from the war. I'm a GI. I've been fighting. I've been flying planes. I've been dropping bombs. I need to see my mother." And the woman, the nun behind the desk, said, "Listen, I hear that story a gazillion times a day, and please sit back down and we will call you." Well, that didn't sit well with my father. And as I mentioned, this was a Catholic hospital, and the nuns were still wearing their flowing habits and their big hats. And my dad stood behind a slightly overweight nun, and every time she took a step going up the stairs to get to the maternity ward, my father took a step. So one by one, he stepped, she stepped, he stepped. He got to the top of the stairs, and ostensibly he dashed. I'm not sure how he knew the room where my mother was. And he said, "I need to see my wife." And again, they refused. And the least they were willing to do was to have him write a note and give it to my mother. So that's what happened. She read the note. She, of course, recognized my father's handwriting. And in the middle of labor, she somehow wobbled off the bed into the corridor, saw my father, and for a few minutes didn't recognize him because he had lost a lot of weight, and he was very tanned from the hot, sunny Italian weather. But after she knew who he was, I guess they had an embrace, and my mother went back to the maternity room, her room, and I was born at 4:20 a.m. the next day. So I love that story, and I wove that into Thanks for the Memories, Love, Sex, and World War II. And the sex, I wasn't going to use the word sex in the title, but the publisher said, come on, that's going to sell more books. So I acquiesced and added love and sex, actually just the sex, which was interesting, talking about the fact that there were women who basically just went and hung out at bases around the country, and they would service the servicemen. I'm sure that there must have been a pull on the part of some of the husbands. I think my dad was totally devoted to my mother and would never have considered, quote unquote, messing around. And in preparation and in research for that book, I interviewed many women who had a similar situation as my mother, and many men as well. It was a fascinating experience. I learned a lot. And hey, if you'd like to know a bit more about relationships between men and women during World War II, please have at it. I'd be delighted. Let's see what else I've done. I can backtrack. I was a high school English teacher, which I mentioned. I worked in the ABC affiliate in Chicago. I wrote and directed educational film strips. I'm laughing because I would guess that there are people listening to this that have no idea what a film strip is. And then I became a freelance writer. So that's a bit of what I was up to. I mentioned Detroit, I think, yes, in terms of where my parents were living. I was born and raised in Detroit. My parents built their dream house in what was then the country, which is now West Bloomfield Hills. We had a beautiful modern house, mid-century, on a hill overlooking a spring-fed lake. My house was the center of activity during the summer, and a horde of my friends would pull up in their cars, and we swam, we canoed, we sailboated, and I also taught swimming. And I was a swimmer. I loved to swim. Not so much anymore, although that might be something I ought to consider. And also, as I mentioned, I'm the oldest of four. My brother next in line. Then I have another brother, only a year and 6 days younger than the older. And then I have my sister who is, I believe, 6 years younger than I am. And that experience, I think, honed my sense of responsibility, the importance of setting a good, what's the word I'm looking for? A good, I can't believe it. I can't think about it. Okay, that's funny. I'm going to laugh at myself. You see how that goes? In any case, a sense of setting examples, being responsible. I went to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. I majored in English and I minored in French. And I forgot that I also got a teaching certificate. I became a teacher. I first taught junior high school for a year, and then I taught senior high school in Massachusetts. And then my then husband and I moved back to the Detroit area. And at that point, I started teaching high school. I'd love to hear from you. I love any ideas you have for future podcasts or recommendations for guests. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I do hope you will become subscribers to the podcast. Thank you. Appreciate it. Aging with Purpose and Passion is the acclaimed weekly podcast hosted by Beverly Glazer, M.A., transition coach and psychotherapist. Each episode features insightful and entertaining guest interviews to empower women in midlife and beyond to rediscover their strength, their resilience, and potential, one motivating story at a time. You can listen to my friend's podcast at reinventimpossible.com.